Okay, so Be'ezras Hashem, we're continuing with our weekly shirim in the Ramchal's Adir BaMarom, and we're continuing where we left off last week with the secret of HaKadosh Baruch Hu's name. The question that the Ramchal set up for us is that if the entirety of creation take shape across the expanses of what we could refer to as the lower Vav and the lower Hey, meaning the Igulim and the Yoshar that fill the Chalal after the re-entrance of the Kav into the vacant space left behind by the Tzimtzum, so then it would seem that we're missing the first two letters of the name, which represent the transcendental modes of Moichin. We have Vavhe, we have that which is accessible to us. We have Igulim and Yoshar. We have the Nefesh and the Ruach. We have that which is accessible and available. But from whence does the possibility of drawing down a Yud Hey into this Vav Hey to create the shame Yud Ke Vav Ke come from? Because at no point in the process of the emergence of creation do we see that we're grasping anything more than the Vav Hey. And so to claim that we have access to the Yud Ke, to the upper points, to the Moichin Hagadolim, to the Gimel Rishon, to the Keser Chachma and Bina, that rests outside of the realm of our graspability. So the question is, where do we get the name Yud Ke Vav Ke from if all we have is the Vav Ke? And what the Ramchal taught us in the name of the Arizal, which is also the basis of what the Rashash and the Torah Chacham are being masbir, is that even though all we have is the Vav even though all we have is the lower seven spheros from Chesed down to Malchus, without really having any true access to Keser, Chachma, and Bina, to the Kutzah Shel Yud, the Yud or the Hey, in spite of the fact that we don't have access to the true expression of the upper Yud K, nevertheless, there is an embedded principle and potency of a Yud K that is within the Vav K itself, and that when we can properly refine the Vav K, we come to reveal that which has always been present, which is the latency of the Yud K contained within the Vav K. Meaning to say, when we talk about a partzuf, when we talk about shlemus, we talk about gimel rishon, keser chachma and bina, and zayin tachtonim, which is chesed down to malchus. That's going to be the gar and the zat, the tippy top parts of the head and the lower parts of the body. The body is what is accessible to each and every lower level. The question is, where does the higher level come down from if we don't have access to it? So what the Ramchal is pointing out is that embedded within the zayin tachtonim, embedded within the chesed, gvur, tferes, netzach, hod, yesod, and malchus, is a secretion, is an expression, is an unfolding of the moichin as they express themselves within Zer Anpin. Yes, we might not have the true access to the moichin of Keser, Chachma, and Bina, which is the true Yud K, but we do have the secret of Keser, Chachma, and Bina, which come about from the Netzach Hod and the Yesod of Bina that are mislabish, that engarb themselves within the Zayin Tachtonim to give us an element of the Chachma within Zer Anpin, of Keser within Zer Anpin, Chachma within Zer Anpin, and Bina within Zer Anpin. So in spite of the fact that we don't have the full wholeness of the upper three and the lower seven, nevertheless, within the lower seven, there's an embedded upper three that can be uncovered. And when we access those upper three elements of Keser, Chachma, and Bina that are misgaber and mislabesh themselves and garb themselves within the Zayin Tachtonim, in spite of the fact that we can't reach the true upper moichin, we're touching an element of those moichin. So really, we only have the Vav K of the Shem Havaya. But because there always has to be an embedded principle of Keser, Chachma, and Bina that is there within Zer Anpin, no matter what, so we see that hidden within Zer Anpin is the secret of the Gimel Rishon. It's not the real Gimel Rishon, it's not the real Keser Chachma and Bina, it's an expression of that Keser Chachma and Bina after it goes down numerous Tzimtzumim, and that it reveals itself later on in the Moichin of Zer Anpin. So that's what the Ramchal has been setting us up for, that even though we only see the Vav Hey, even though we only see the lower half of existence, nevertheless, within the lower half of existence is an embedded reminder of the upper half of existence, even though we have no true access to the upper half of existence. And that's why we said that the letters, the osios, express themselves fundamentally in Zer Anpin, but they conceal themselves and also reveal themselves at the level of Arich. At the level of Arich, at the level of the highest level, so the letters are not there. The name is not officially there. It's still prior to the actual expression of the name of HaKadosh Baruch Hu because it's still prior to that which is named. A name is only something that is subject to calling it out and having an access point to it. That's what we do when we name things. So even though we're saying Yud K Vav K, which implies that we have an access point to the true Yud K, we're not actually calling out the true Yud K. What we're calling down is an expression of that Yud K, which is embedded within the Vav Hey, and that's what gives us a Shem Havaya. That's why the letter letters are there revealed in a real way by Zer Anpin. When we access the Vav Hey, we are really accessing the name of HaKadosh Baruch Hu because that's what's revealed to us. But by the level of Arich, by the level of Keser, which is not accessible to us yet, except by way of that expression downwards that engarbs itself within the lower seven spheros, the letters there are contingent. They're not truly there because the letters are not essentially there. The naming is not the essentially naming something that can be grasped. It's only a remez, and therefore the letters by Zer Anpin are there. They're omed, and on the level of arich, they're only omed v'talui. They're contingent still. That's what the Ramchal teaches us when he says that the Zayin Tachtonim are the Hanhaga themselves. We have access to that. That's the Zayin Tachtonos, Chesed to Malchus. And the Gimel Rishon of Keser, Chacham, and Bina are the Ataros la Hanhaga. Those are the crowns of Hanhaga that even though they're not fully accessible, they still represent a certain processing that we have the capacity of uncovering in our experience. Zok the Heilig Ramchal. The Amnan, צריך שתדע כי כשאנו מזכירים לאיזה אחד בשם, הוא מפני הכירנו עניינו ומהוסו, אשר על כן נגדירהו בשם ההוא. So, we have a problem, says the Ramchal. When it comes to the name of something, a name represents graspability. I call something out because I have an access to it. And the way that I have access to it is by naming it, by domesticating it and containing itself within that name. When I call out somebody's name, I'm calling out their entire self, and they're turning towards me as a result of me awakening their source name, the code that represents who they are. But if that's the case, then when we talk about the name of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Yud K Vav K, which represents the essential name of Hashem, we don't truly have access to the upper Yud K. We don't truly have a graspability of the upper Yud K. We don't have a grasp of Keser Chachman Bina, of the lights of Keser and the Anhagas HaYichud. So how could it be when we call out this name of Yud K Vav K that if we're claiming that a name represents what is being named, the Yud K over here is not actually representative of what's being named. The Yud K represents the essential transcendental qualities of HaKadosh Baruch Hu that remain outside of the Seder HaShtalshelus in any graspable way, the Keser, the Chachma, and the Bina. And when we talk about the Yud K within the Shem Havaya that we have access to, we're only talking about a residual imprint of those mochin that descend down afterwards. So how could it be that we're calling it out by name in spite of the fact that the naming is not representing what exactly we feel is being named? So Zok the Heilig Ramchal, Kol Shekain b'Shemos HaMa'oros she'enim al tzad ha'haskam v'hamikra, ela heim moirim atzmius hadavar haniskar al yedehem. So this is even more the case when it comes to the names that HaKadosh Baruch Hu gives to himself. Because if I was talking about calling a person out by a name, so I could say maybe that name is just a contingent decision that was made and it doesn't represent the essence of the person, and therefore I can call by a nickname. But the names that HaKadosh Baruch Hu gives us to be able to call him out, especially the same Ha'etzem, which represents the Ma'oros, which represents the way in which HaKadosh Baruch Hu reveals himself in this world. So how could it be that the name is not going to actually be aligned with that which is being named, but rather just a surrogate for that which is being named? Because we don't really have an access to the true Yud K, we only have the Moichin as they engarb themselves down within Zer Anpin. When it comes to knowledge, when it comes to something that's graspable, we name it. When it comes to something that's ungraspable, it's without a name. And so how do we come about with this in-between place of something that's not graspable, but it has a name which seems to make it graspable even though it's not graspable? Al Kain Amru Eliyahu Zabat Filaso. What we say in the Patach Eliyahu, Shala'in Soif Yisbarach Shemoy Loinim Sashem Shem. When it comes to the light of the infinite, when it comes to the absolute infinitude of HaKadosh Baruch Hu's light down in this world, we don't have a name for it because a name would be a domestication of it. It would be an attempt to grasp it or lay claim to it and to lay claim to a grasp of it. But we know we have absolutely no grasp of the infinite himself, blessed be he. Ki efshar ligdoros b'shem shem. Leis machshava tvisa beklal. There's no grasping of HaKadosh Baruch Hu's essence. There's no naming of HaKadosh Baruch Hu's essence. Amnan sarach sheteda. But so what we have to know is as follows. Ki kol hadvarim sha'anu maskirim b'soid dmus ha'adam Ikarim eno ela ma'atzilus ulamata. Aval lemala me'atzilus, but above atzilus, ein anu mechanen shemois elu ela b'derech she'ela. Umitzad ma sheyesh ma shehem shoyrish l'devarim ha'im ba'atzilus. So now, in order to understand the secret of the name, the secret of the Shem Havaya, which somehow, some way, the Yud K is representing something that is not even present within the Shem Havaya, because the Shem Havaya, really all we have is the Vav K. All we have is the Niglos la Anu Vanenu. All we have is that which is revealed to us. But that which is concealed, the Yud K, the true Yud K, is perpetually removed. That falls into the category of that which has no name, that which is infinite and has no actual naming. And so, in order to answer up this question, the Ramchal is going to bring us into the Seder Hashtalshalos. After the Halal, after the Tzimtzum, and the Kav entering back in, and then that Kav being mitagel and becoming the Yud Sfiros of Igulim, which are the Nefesh and the Hay, and then the Yud Sfiros of Yoshar, which are going to be inside of the Igulim, which are going to be the Vav, and then we're going to have the worlds of Adam Kadmon, and then Adam Kadmon gives shape to the world of Atzilus, and then the world of Atzilus gives shape to the worlds of Bria, Yitzir, and Asiyah. So we have these five worlds. We have Adam Kadmon and everything that exists beyond it, the Olam HaMalbush and all of those things that preceded the Tzimtzum. Then we have Adam Kadmon, which is the interface between the infinite light of HaKadosh Baruch Hu and the finite worlds of existence that are going to begin to emerge. So that's the highest world. That's the Kutza Shel Yud, Adam Kadmon. Then we have the world of Atzilus. Atzilus is really going to be the first point in which we begin to talk about Orus and Kalim, where we begin to talk about drawing down Moichin, of Bnei Yisrael having a shaykhus to the Olamos. We have no shaykhus to the worlds of Adam Kadmon and above. The only thing that we have shaykhus to is the world of Atzilus. And then there's going to be the three worlds of separation, Bria, Yitzir, and Asiyah, which are far lower. Now, typically speaking, when we take the Shem Havaya, we look at the Shem Havaya and we ascribe the world's alignment to it. So the uppermost point of the Yud is Adam Kadmon. The Yud is the Chachma of Atzilus. The first Hey is going to be the Bina of Bria. The Vav is going to be the Zer Anpin of the Sfiros Chesed down to Malchus, down to Yesod, and then Malchus is going to be the Hey. So we see that the Olam HaAtzilus is going to correspond to the first Yud. But as the Ramchal is pointing out to us now, and based on the Arizal, and based on the Leshem explains this very, very clearly, there's another way of looking at the worlds. That in truth, if we look at the way that the worlds unfold from Atik Yomed, from Adam Kadmon, so the Kutzel Shel Yud is going to be the infinite light of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. The Yud itself is going to be the Orus de Karkapta, the highest levels of Adam Kadmon that we don't really have much to talk about. We don't have much to talk about with that Kutzel Shel Yud of the Orus de Karkapta, the Keser of Adam Kadmon. Abba is going to be the secret of the Shem Havaya of Ab. Then comes Ima, which is going to be the Bina, which is the Sag. Then comes Atzilus, which is going to be corresponding to this breakdown of the worlds. It's going to associate itself with the Osvav, and the worlds of Bia and separation are going to correspond to Malchus itself. So instead of seeing Atzilus as the first Yud of the Shem over here, when we're counting the Partsufim that preceded it, like Adam Kadmon and that which doesn't enter into conversation, the world of Atzilus is actually going to correspond to a Vav rather than the Yud. So what we see here is that the entirety of the world of Atzilus is all still going to be contained within that territory of Zer Anpin. So that when we talk about the Shem Havaya of the world of Atzilus, which is Yud K Vav K, even though there's a Yud K there, nevertheless, it's only the Yud K that's mislabish itself within the Zer Anpin. And so we're going to be able to see again how within the name itself, within that Vav Hey, within the half name, there's actually going to be the entirety of the system, which is going to be the world of Atzilus and everything down. So Zakta Heilig Ramchal. When it comes to the names, when it comes to understanding the way that HaKadosh Baruch Hu created the world in accordance with the shape of the human experience, all of that is only from the world of Atzilus and down. But above Atzilus, the Oros of Ab and Sag and the Oros of Adam Kadmon, we don't actually call a name there. The only naming that we can give there is by way of borrowing the notion of a name and pretending that we have an accessibility to it, but by no way laying claim to naming what we can grasp. The name on that level, prior to the world of Atzilus, is B'derach She'ela. It's not something that is actually graspable, it's just a borrowing of the possibility of naming. But Mitzad Ma'sheim Sheshorish L'Dvar Mahim Ba'Atzilus. The reason we refer to those realms above Atzilus by way of a name is only because they have a role to play in the unfolding of Atzilus afterwards. But like we said, the Moichin come from Keser Chacham and Bina, and they express themselves within Zer Anpin. If those upper worlds do not express themselves downwards, we would have no need to relate to them. The Ikrim be'emes hu bezun, but in truth, all that we have actual access to is Vav-K. Everything that we grasp in this world is a Vav-K, and everything above it is just expressing itself down within it. V'zeh hasagasenu be'emes enu ele bezun. Our true access point, our true hasaga is only in Zer Anpin and Malchus. But when it comes to Arachanpin and Abba Ve'ima, Keser and Chachman Bina, sigim rak mitzad hayosim sherish ledevarim lamata bezun. The only actual grasp that we have of the Yud K is the fact that they express themselves downwards within the Vav Hey, and they serve the role of Moichin down there. If the Moichin did not descend from those upper realms, we would have no accessibility to them because all we actually have grasp of is Vav K. Ukeshitidaktek Tzimtzum be'emes and Zakta Heilig Ramchal. Even though we typically say that Atzilus is the Yud, so how can we say that Atzilus is the Vav over here? what we see in truth is ki ha'atzilus atzmo hu sod zer anpin. The zer anpin is the entirety of the world of atzilus. That's the vavke that draws down the moichin of keser chacham and bina in to be mashlemin into a shem havaya. But in truth, we don't have true access beyond zer anpin. And that's what it means we don't have access beyond the world of Atzilus, because Atzilus is ultimately Zer Anpin. Ki ores hakarkapta da'ak came besod arach anpin. That the highest oros that come out of the karkapta da'ak, which we don't speak about, which we don't even refer to as a permutation of HaKadosh Baruch Hu's names, that's the secret of Keser. Then in the secret of Ab, which is the first Shem Havaya and Milo Yudin, that's going to be Chachma. Then comes Ima, which is going to be the beginning of creation, which is going to be the Shem Havaya of Sag. And then Atzilus is going to be the parts of Zer Anpin. So we see that even though all we have access to is Zer Anpin and Malchus, nevertheless, that represents Atzilus, which is Zer Anpin, and the worlds of Bria, Yitzir, and Asiya, all grouped together, which is going to be Nukva. Va'inyan hu amuk ma'od ma'od. This is very, very deep, because what we're showing is that contained within the Vavhe, contained within the full picture that we feel we have, is really the revelation that it's all still partial, and that all partiality also just has a fullness in it. The Shem Havaya that we have access to is all contained within the Vav and the Hey, which are going to be Atzilus and Bria, Yitzir, and Asiya. Ein kan makom bior. We're not going to explain this fully here. Nimsa lefizeh shahashem atzmo hu bezun. It turns out that the fullness of HaKadosh Baruch Hu's name, the Yud K, the Vav, and the K, which is really only the particular expression of the Yud K Vav K of the Vav K, it all exists within Zer Anpin, in the secret of the Yud K Vav being Chesed, Gvur, and Teferes, and the He Achrona being Malchus. So we see everything is really contained within the Vav He. The Gam Yud K, the Chachma and the Bina of the Zer Anpin, and the Vav, which is the Vak Shalo, and the He of Malchus, it's all contained within that Shem Havaya, even though they're really all retained within the Vav He itself. Ach, Abba ve'ima nikroim al shem masheim poyalim bezun. The reason we call Abba ve'ima as Yud He is because they're having an impact on Zun, not because they're actually representative of the essential Yud K, which rests outside of our graspability, but because they're having their impact, they're playing a role. That's the moichin within Za. And v'nim shachim by beside ha-moichin, like we said, we draw down Keser Chachman Bina, and then they're referred to as if they're a Yud K, but in truth, they're really just aspects of the Vav K, meaning to say, even though all we have is the partial piece of the Vav K, a half a picture, nevertheless, when we dig down deep into the halfness of that picture, we come to uncover the latent wholeness that always already existed within it, that in spite of the fact that it's still not representative of the upper Yud K, the true transcendence, it's a drawing down of that true transcendence into an immanent form, which gives us the ability to retrace our steps back to true transcendence itself. The kain the alkain beidrizuta, and this is what it means in idrizuta. Bezer anpin haoisios inun mamish. When it comes to the osios of the shem havaya, as it corresponds to the lower partsufim, zer anpin and malchus, the vav and the hey, the letters are there in actuality. It's the true name of Hakadosh Baruch Hu, kihem b'makomim, because that's where they exist. Ach ba'atika, but on the level of atika, at that highest level of atika, which is the keser chachman bina, talian, they're contingent. Ki enam sham ela lefishu sharish laza. The only access point we have to those lights are the fact that they play a role in Zer Anpin, and that's why we have access to that which is above the Vav Hey. But the Ben Adam is always a Baal Chisaron, and all we are is a Vak that's waiting for a Gar. We're always perpetually yearning to draw down a new fulfillment, and that new fulfillment comes down into our experience through our Chisaron Atzmo. Nimsa, Shamasha Anu Masigim Ba'atika, any grasp that we have on the level of Keser Chachman Bina, V'chein Ba'aba V'ima Sheim Nechlalimbo, Keser Chachman Bina in their true form, Kimivur Be'idrazuta, Eino Elamitzad Mashu Poil Liyo Sharish Liza. The only presence and engagement we have with that is when those moichin descend down to become the moichin of Za. And this is the klal. Arich anben va'ava ve'ima einam nodaim elamitzan mashehim nimshachim lizer anben. We don't have access to the nistaros Hashem Elokeinu, to Cheser Chachman Bina, except by dint of the fact that they express themselves and they draw themselves down and they imprint their imprinting upon Zer Anpin itself. Mitzad zeh nikraim Yud and that's why we refer to as Keser Chachman Bina within our Zayin Tachtoinim as Yud because they engage in a way of expressing the higher worlds within the lower worlds. But the lower worlds themselves are referred to as Vavke. The Yud K is only a borrowed term because it's not the true Yud K. We don't have access to the true Yud K. The true Yud K is concealed from us. That's Tzimtzum. We don't have access to the true expression of HaKadosh Baruch Hu's light. All we have is the residual drawing down and secretion of that light into the process of our Vavhe, that in any place of Chisaron, we have the ability to dig down deep and refine to reveal the latency of fullness of the Gar within the Vak that are always already there, but it's still just the lower seven, because then we're still going to realize that even though we have shlemus now, it's still chisaron klape that which is above it. Va'ata avu l'tshuvas hashela asher izkarti b'rishona. And now we're going to be able to answer up the question we started with, says the Ramchal. Ki ha'aninu kachu. The question is, at the creation of the world, all we have is a vav hey. There's no place for the yud hey. So from whence does the yud hey come? How do we have a full name of HaKadosh Baruch Hu? Hine b'tchila sider ha'ma'atzilas abriya b'seid panimius v'chitzonius. In the beginning of existence, HaKadosh Baruch Hu set up existence to be the inner and the outer, the vav and the hey, the igulim and the yoshar. Ki kol ha'reshimu ha'nishar b'chalal u'seid chitzonius. The tzimtzum and the irreducible trace of HaKadosh Baruch Hu's light that exists within the halal, that's the secret of the chitzonius, that's the lower hay. And the kav hanichnas bohu b'soid pinimius, and the kav that comes down is going to be the vav. So we have a vav hay. That's the secret of chesed and din, or and kli. So that's all that we have. They unify together and they become a vav hey. And then what happens is the kav draws out koyach from the rishimu, and the rishimu and the halal draw out koyach from the kav. So we have now a doubled form of a vav k. So that's the unfolding of the name of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, even though it's just a vav hey. There's a vav hey, and then there's the tzimtzum, and which is the hey, and then there's the kav, which is the vav, and then what happens within the kav is that there's another unfolding of a vav hey, which is igulim and yoshar. But even though it's just vav hey, because we have no access point to the true yud k, the first two letters of vav k are going to be referred to as yud k, because even though they're not the true expression of moichin, which are inaccessible to us, they're a drawing down of those moichin into the vav hey, and in relationship to the true vav hey, the thing that is acting like a yud k within the vav k is now going to be referred to as a yud k, which is why we call it a yud k vav k, even though all we actually have is a vav k. And this is what the Ramchal is going to bring us into right now, one of the deepest ideas. At the beginning, the infinite light of HaKadosh Baruch Hu removed itself completely from the voided space, and it left that vacant space, the chalal apani, behind. Va'az nikra hachalal soid ha'hei. The chalal apani is referred to the hey of the Shem Havaya. Va'achar kach baka uba b'kav echad ma'oiroi v'zehu soid oisvav v'zeh ha'ikr b'hanaga. And then the kav comes down into the chalal, and that's the ikr way that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is going to be running the world, and that's the osvav, that's the vav k. That's the secret of zer anpin and nukva, the zachar and the nekeva, the vav k. Aval bevadei shaha ein sof al yedei hakav hazeh nishar davak b'ne'etzal hazeh shu'ak. But the secret of the kav is that the descent of the infinite light into the halal, even though it's only going to operate by way of deficiency in the status of a vav hey, nevertheless it always remains bound up and connected in that secret of the kav, of that kivui that is drawn down from above to below. That kav is nishar davak b'ne'etzal hazeh shu'ak. That kav draws down from the highest lights of Adam Kanmon. Even though in truth we can't refer to the worlds of Keser and Chachma and Bina by any name because we don't have any access to it, nevertheless this vav has a secret hook that allows it to draw down that higher light, and therefore there's a divuk between the vav hey, and that's going to be referred to as the yud k, meaning to say there's the halal and there's the kav, and everything above that is completely unknowable. The yud k is completely unknowable because it exists prior to the tzimtzum, but because of the secret of the kav, it draws down that light from before the tzimtzum, so therefore we can say that we draw down into the vav hey a remnant of that yud k, which is going to be the moichin of Keser, Chachma, and Bina as they descend down into Zer Anpin and Nukva, which is going to be referred to relative to the lower level of the vav hey as a yud k, even though it's not the true yud k. It's a relative level of yud k in relation to the deficiency of the vav k, but in relationship to the true element of the yud k, that's never entering into conversation because that's the representation of HaKadosh Baruch Hu himself, Kavyachol. Perush. Meaning to say, Vaday imhu nishar davak hu meirbo. If the kav is connected to the light that was there before the tzimtzum, so that means there's going to be a perpetual bond between the two of them, which means that the vav hey, even though it remains separate from the yud k, will continue to draw down by way of invisibility and by way of spooky action at a distance, the invisible light of the yud k. L'soid ha'ara hazois anukarim b'shem yud k. And this ha'ara that comes down through the kav, the moichin, the shirish of the kol tzama, of the oiris, the havayos minukot, that bittul b'tachlis that draws down through the vav hey, so we're going to refer to the moichin as yud k, even though relative to the true yud k they're still just a vav k. Relative to the lower vav k, they can be considered as if they're the wholeness within deficiency, which is the yud k within the vav k, which gives us the secret of the Shem Havaya. V'zem ma shekatavnu she'ein yud hey masigen elim epnei hamshacha el vav hey. There is no grasp of yud k other than the fact that it rests and it reveals itself within vav hey, because yud k just represents that which is hidden from us. Yud k is not something that ever comes into revelation. It's something that is always something that is above revelation. The moment it comes into revelation, we call it Yud K because it's in reference to the Vav K that we know. It's the new entrance of something that was unknown, but it's never the actual nature of the Yud K. The Yud K remains perpetually inaccessible. V'zeu masha kasavnu she'ein Yud K musagim elim ipnei hamshachasam el Vav K. The only shaychus we have to Keser Chacham and Bina now is because they're drawn down and schlepped through all of the partsufim down to express themselves by the Iker, which is their Anpin, and Nukva, which is the Vav and the K. And therefore, in relationship to that Vav Hey, these Moichin, because they're being schlepped down from the highest place, are referred to as the Yud K. V'zeh masha kasavnu she'ein Yud K musagim el b'nei hamshachasam el Vav Hey. V'zeh soid masha anu oimrim she'tzamtzem ba'atbash hu Yud K Yud K. This is a secret from the Remez, and this is one of the deepest secrets, that tzamtzem, Tzadi mem, tzadi men, ba'atbash is Yud K, meaning to say, what was the Tzimtzum? The Tzimtzum is the removal of the Yud K, the concealment of that level which was there prior, which was the transcendence of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. HaKadosh Baruch Hu mitzamsem the Yud K, to the degree that all of existence is now just a Vav Hey that's perpetually yearning for that which has vacated the scene through the Tzimtzum, which is the Yud K, which is the essential light of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And that remains hidden, so that every single thing that is hidden from us, every level of non-grasp, every level of that which remains above my capacity to draw it down, at that moment is referred to as the true Yud K, which was Mitzumsum. The Tzimtzum is Yud K. It hides the true Yud K. And what comes down afterwards through the Kav is a remnant of that Yud K, somehow to draw down a minimal form of those Mochin, which even though they're not the real Yud K, because the Yud K is concealed through the Tzimtzum itself, the only way it reveals itself is by way of concealment itself, but nevertheless, in relationship to the Vav K, which are the Kalim of Zer Anpin and Nukva, so the new incoming light is going to be referred to as Yud K, but it's not the essential Yud K. The essential Yud K is perpetually concealed. That's the secret of Tzamtzem. Tzamtzem is Atbash Yud K. Only in the future are we going to say Yihiyeh Hashem Echad U'Shmoi Echad. Yihiyeh, Yud K is going to be the true revelation. That's the secret of the Zivug Should Be Oila Yafa. Yafa is the gematria of 95, which is the gematria of Yud K, which is 30, plus 65, which is the Shem Adnus, which is the Yichud. Nowadays it's Yud K Vav K, which is 26, plus Adnus 65, which is 91, which is the gematria of Amen and Sela, Amen and Sukkah. But in the future, it's going to be Yihi Hashem Echad U'Shmoi Echad, that the Vav K is going to be revealed to have always been a Yud K. And that's the light of the future. That's when the Zivug should be Oile Yafa, when in truth the Zivug is no longer going to be between Shem Havaya 26 and Shem Adno 65, but rather with Shem Yud K, which is 30, and Shem Adno 65. This is what the Rebbe points out in this week's Parsha, Parshas Koirach, which it says is Parsha Zu Yafa Nidreshes B'Medrash Tanchumen. The whole story of Koirach is judged very nicely, Yafa Nidrash, in Medrash Tanchuma, because the whole secret of Kairach is ultimately how the Vav He will eventually become the Yud K. So that's why it's Yafa Nidrashes. Yafa, says the Rebbe, is the gematria of 95, which is the secret of the Zivug should be Oili Yafa, which is not Havaya but Yud K, which merges with 65 with Adnus, and that's the secret of the future. And that's why it's Nidrash and Medrash Tanchumen, because it brings about the Nechama and the calmness that a person knows when they come to realize that everything that is not revealed to me right now will come to be revealed, and when everything is revealed, it will be revealed that there's even more left that hasn't been revealed. This is the secret of Tzamtzem being the Atbash of Yud K, because that's what's removed. What does the Ramchal say here? Shebechinas ha'elyonos nistalku shehem Yud K. The higher levels of God's infinite light departed, which were the Yud K. V'nisharu ha'tachtoinos shehem Vav K. And all that remained were the Tachtoinim, which was the Tzimtzum and the Kav, which is the Vav K. Shari lo haya efshar lahaskir afilu Yud K be'ein soif shenistalik. We can't even refer to that light of the infinite light that departed the void by the name of Yud K. Kol shekein shekoidem atzimtzum lo haya shum davar. We can't refer to that light. Now, once there was the Tzimtzum and all that remains is the Vav K, what the Ramchal is saying is the most important thing. Before the Tzimtzum, there was no possibility of naming HaKadosh Baruch Hu, because the infinite light of HaKadosh Baruch Hu was ever present. That infinite light of HaKadosh Baruch Hu is referred to as Yud K. The Tzimtzum was the departure of that Yud K, and in the departure of the Yud K, what remains is a Vav K. And now all we know is that if there's a Vav K, it reminds me that there must be a Yud K that is departed from here. And by way of recognizing the Tzimtzum of that Yud K, of the true nature of Keser Chochmah and Bina, I reconnect to it. That's what the Ramchal is saying. He says that Ela sha'ata, after the tzimtzum, shenishar ma shenishar, which is the secret of the vav hey, which is the tzimtzum and the kav, lema shenistalik, that which left, that light which departed, so that HaKadosh Baruch Hu could create existence, anu koirim yud ke. We refer to that as yud ke, which just represents the fact that it corresponds to the bechinos of the yud ke from the Shem Havaya, which is found nowadays. V'havein ma'od. The yud ke that we have, the moichin we have, are only a remnant of our recognition of what we don't have. That all we experience is the vav ke. Anytime we draw down a yud ke, it's only a recognition of that which is ungraspable. Anytime I'm thinking about moichin, I'm thinking about something that is not in this moment right now. And by being aware of the fact that it's not in this moment right now, I draw down a reshimu of it and I fulfill the Shem Havaya. But that reminds me always that I'm ultimately still just going to be a vav ke. Sof davar, vav he shenishar, the vav he that remains, which is the kav and the halal, hu atzma nispashit ledalad osios. Those letters themselves break open into its own yud ke vav ke. V'zeu kamo shahaza shehu vav he levad. V'nechshav le'eser im keser chachma mina. Just like Zer Anpin is really only 7 spheros, but it can be considered 10 because it has the latent 3 within it. And this is the secret of the hispashtas hamoichin of Abba and Ima, which descend down into Zer Anpin and become the Shem Havaya. Kach vavhe harishon shenishar. This vavhe that remains, this halal and the kav, hineyesh bechinas hadveikus shel orin sofbo. It contains a connection, that yud ke, just as the partzufim of Zer Anpin and Malchus draw down moichin from keser chachma and bina, so too the halal and the kav, which are the vav ke, draw down the yud ke from the or ein sof, which is like the abba ve'ima within Zer Anpin. Which means that ultimately the secret of the Tzimtzum is that every point of awareness is an awareness of a deficiency, and that deficiency beckons the mind to that which cannot enter into the scene, which is the Yud Ke, which is true transcendence. And when we become aware of that, we draw down an element of that residual light, and it fulfills the name to become a Shem Havaya Shalim. But nevertheless, at the end of the day, the Yud Ke remains truly inaccessible to us. That Tzimtzum is the removal of the Yud Ke, which means that Tzimtzum means that I see what is, I experience what is, and every moment of the fact that I'm aware and I contemplate the fact that there's something above and more, that itself is the shleimus hatzimtzum. That's why I draw down the moichin, and it just reveals another level of the tzimtzum itself. So reminding us that all we have is a vav hey, and we can draw down a yud hey to be mashlim that vav hey, but that yud hey is only in relationship to the deficiency of the vav hey. That's why they're going to be considered as whole. But in relationship to that which is truly transcendent, even what we're referring to as a yud hey is still only a vav hey, and that's why tzamseim is yud ke, because it reveals that Hashem decided to remove those elements of the Yud K, and all that's left is the Vav K. And our yearning draws down new levels of Yud K until the future, which is Yi Hashem Echad Ishmai Echad, where the Tzimtzum is undone, and it's going to be from Vav He is going to be transformed to a Yud K Be'ezras Hashem.